Hi, I'm Jeremy Crosby.
And I'm Nick Boucher. We're your hosts for the program that's all about your city, Talking Fitchburg.
Every weekday, we pull together the news, events, and information you need to stay on top of what's happening in the city of Fitchburg.
Find Talking Fitchburg on cable TV, Roku, Amazon Fire, Apple TV, and our live stream on the web. Plus, you can find all our headlines and stories on Facebook, YouTube, and our video on demand service. This is your city.
Keep up with Talking Fitchburg and the issues affecting you and your neighbors.
Want to know what's happening in your city? Get Notify Me messages from the City of Fitchburg. Visit fitchburgwi.gov on your computer or mobile device and select the big Notify Me button on the left. Enter your email and/or phone number, whichever is best for you to get notifications. Scroll down the list and select all the topics you're interested in to receive email or text messages about. You'll be notified every time one of your topics is updated. Sign up for Notify Me, one more way to keep up with your Fitchburg government.
I call to order the meeting of the Committee of the Whole on May 28, 2025 at 6:31 p.m. The first item of business is the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next is roll call. Will you help us out, Chad?
I will. Good evening, everyone. Mayor Arata-Frada.
Here.
Alder Dantzler.
Here.
Alder Gerhardt.
Here.
Alder Herbst.
Here.
Alder Jetzer. Excuse me.
Here.
Alder Latisse.
Here.
Alder Maldonado. Alder Reichstead.
Here.
Alder Vafadari. You have a quorum.
Thank you so much. Next item of business is the approval of minutes. I'll need a motion on the April 23, 2025 Cal minutes.
So moved. Second.
Motion to approve by Alder Dantzler, second by Alder Jetzer. Any comments or questions? Seeing none, all in favor of accepting the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion carries. Next item is 5, public appearances for non-agenda items. I believe this is a non-agenda item. We have David Haight here to speak. We don't have the clock up right now, but we'll time you and I'll let you know when the 3 minutes is up. So please feel free to come and get started whenever you're ready.
Good evening. Looking back over the last 6 years, with the vote by the council of removing the funding from restoring the Seminole Glen Environmental Corridor, I'm 0 for 6 years in terms of actual impact. So it's time to change strategy, time to get serious. So what I'm here to talk about is a notice of claim, which is a notice that I'm going to be bringing a lawsuit against the city for the unlawful, unconstitutional enactment of the wheel tax. As I stated, based on an opinion, very well written, very thorough opinion from the League of Wisconsin Municipalities, the ordinance and the action of the council over the last 6 or 7 years, according to the official record of the minutes of the meetings and the agendas thereof, the city council has not only in ordinance, but in practice, delegated its primary duty to this city and to its citizens, which is legislating. As I stated previously, the core element of legislating is determining what you're going to legislate on. Now, the fact that the wheel tax was never voted in any level of approval by the elected alders, not to put on the agenda, and then for the actual item itself, the mayor, when she's voting to break the tie, is in fact a legislative member of the council. That's not an issue. So the fact that I'm claiming it's unconstitutional is not based on the fact that it was a tie vote by the mayor. That was perfectly proper. It just does emphasize the danger of you, the council, and I know you didn't enact the ordinance, but you're going to have to unenact the ordinance and enact rules of procedure. But the point is that because there was no adoption at any level by the council of the wheel tax, and it was put on the agenda by the mayor, and then the tie was broken by the mayor, is a dramatic example of tyranny. One person, I'm not saying that she doesn't intend to do her job, she is doing the job that you assigned her in the city ordinance, putting things on the agenda. She's doing the best she can, given what she understands her job to be. The issue is here. And so the fact that you did not vote to put it on an agenda, nor did the elected alders vote to approve it, is dramatic proof both to the citizenry and to the judge that will hear this case. And so I'd like to put this in the record. I know I have to provide a copy to the clerk. Have it be an official file. Thank you.
All righty. We have no one else in chambers or online for public appearances on agenda items, so we'll move on to item 6, agenda items. 6A, Fitchburg Chamber Visitor and Business Bureau update by Angela Kinderman. Angela, welcome. We're excited to hear from you.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, if that's all right.
Yes.
And we will just, where am I at here? I'll just run through this presentation, but feel free to stop me or ask any questions along the way if you have any. I'm just here to give our annual update. The Fitchburg Chamber Visitor Bureau is Fitchburg's tourism entity, so we are charged with marketing and promoting the city of Fitchburg to capture visitors' attention and their economic impact. So that's what our goal is there. I just said that. So the reason why marketing and promoting our community is so important is, as I mentioned, we want to make sure that we capture some of that economic spending that goes on by the visitors that come to Dane County. We are partners with Destination Madison, and they did a great job of getting really good data in the last couple of years. So here I'm sharing the 2023 economic data. In 2023, Dane County had 8.9 million visitors. They were spending $4.1 million a day. That kind of activity translates to over 18,000 jobs created in the hospitality and tourism industry. And what they're spending their money on, about 14.5% on recreation and entertainment, 10.5% of that $4.1 million a day is in accommodations, 10.5% food and beverage, transportation, and retail. So again, this is just kind of a in dollars amount showing you why it's important that we continue to put Fitchburg on the map, highlight our amenities, our attractions, and welcome people here whenever we can. Some other data shared with us from Destination Madison, I think, is profiles of who are our visitors, who are those people that are spending their dollars in Dane County and our communities. And the top 3 profiles, the average visitor, first there's the active traveler, so that's people that are visiting, they want to spend their time doing things, biking, obviously, biking the Berg would be one good thing. They want adventure, they're coming here for sports tourism, they also enjoy culinary experiences, retail, shopping, and a lot of outdoor activities. We also have the other top 3, one of the top 3 visitors is a culture seeker, so they are looking at historical tours, historical places, historical or cultural experiences such as a concert, culinary experience, those type of things. And then the other visitor that I think people forget that is really one of our top spenders are what we're calling the casual getaway, but really people who are visiting friends and family in the area. We want to make sure that we are putting ourselves in front of them and capturing their attention and providing them with a lot of things to do when they're visiting. They stay on the average 3.8 nights. They spend about $1,700 when they're here. They want to socialize. They want to do things outdoors. They place value on doing things where they can create memories. So this just kind of gives you an idea of who the visitors are to Dane County and to Fitchburg. And then also it really helps us as an organization, and it informs our marketing decisions. And it informs the things that we offer in Fitchburg and the places that we continue to promote and market. Any questions?
You can keep going, Angela.
So as a destination, as I mentioned, those are some of the things that we focus our attention on in our marketing efforts. We also serve as Fitchburg's Visitor Bureau, so kind of the concierge or the city's front door. We work on building relationships and support programmings that continue to have that economic impact in our community. Kind of some of the hard assets that we do is we create and distribute marketing materials and campaigns that highlight things that those visitors would want to participate in. We kind of focus on 3 areas in Fitchburg. First, we want to make sure we create and extend that brand of Fitchburg. So everything we do is informed by who we are as a community and sharing that brand across all of our marketing efforts. And then there's obviously some of these things, we create community guides, hard assets, bike maps, very popular. We have an e-newsletter that gets really good engagement. We engage with over 35 online media outlets, not just internally, but externally. Okay. Another area that we focus some attention on is corporate development. Obviously, we want to make sure that the businesses in our community that are bringing visitors, bringing people here to train, bringing people here for conferences or meetings, we want to provide as much support for them so that they continue to support our hotels and our Fitchburg businesses when they're here. So we do some things. We do some marketing for our city's economic development department. We provide meeting grants to conferences or associations that are bringing people here to stay in our hotels. And we also support with sponsorship some of our other bigger meetings or forums, such as the Promega Stem Cell Symposium, the International Forum on Consciousness, things like that. And then obviously we're very involved in leisure development. This is what most people think of when they think of tourism. And it's the things that people want to go out and have a good time at. Again, we want to attract those top 3 visitors, the demographics that like to spend money and travel to Dane County and Fitchburg. And of course, you have to have things to do for when they come. So just some of the things that we're either involved in both from a financial level or promotional, or we actually produce. We're in the middle of Bike the Berg Challenge, or that has just been kicked off. Kids Building Wisconsin was last week. Big, wonderful event for Fitchburg. Festa Italia, I believe, is this weekend. Concerts at McKee will be starting in a couple of weeks. Agora Art Fair, then our Holiday Lights Tour, Get Festive, all kinds of events that we continue to promote and market, and then also help produce. I think I mentioned we serve as the kind of the city's concierge. We provide a lot of visitor assistance year round. We also take a good amount of time to make sure that we have strong partnerships in the region and in the area that help with the tourism efforts. Obviously, Destination Madison is our partner. Travel Wisconsin, which is the State Department of Wisconsin's tourism department. Obviously, our Fitchburg hotel properties, work with them closely on a variety of things at any time. They all know that they can call on us for assistance. And then our Bike Fitchburg is very helpful, actually working with us on upcoming bike ride and B-Cycle. These are just a little bit of you can see our continue to rise in terms of our engagement, our web views, social media platforms. We have at a 32% social reach increase from 23 to 24, which is kind of quite a bit. We have a little over 20,000 followers across all our platforms. Quite a bit of an increase in the Bike the Berg challenge, 350% up from the launch of 2021. This year, I think we're even beyond that. We're having a good year this year. And then I will encourage everybody, if they don't receive the Visit newsletter, it's a once a month publication that comes to you via email. And it's a really good synopsis of what's going on in the community in the next 4 to 5 weeks. I mentioned the Bike the Berg Challenge. This was launched in 2021. We started this year in April. I just included some of the feedback that we get from participants. It's a honor system challenge that we run April through September. And we just get great feedback every year from the people that participate. It's a wonderful way to extend, like we mentioned, our brand of Fitchburg. And then it also kind of encourages people to get out and get to know their community better via bikes. And this year we've added something to the Bike the Berg Challenge. We're doing an organized ride called Fitchburg's Draft Picks. It is on June 7th, I think, Saturday, June 7th. And people can sign up. We're going to take a 18-mile round trip ride visiting all 3 of our Fitchburg breweries. We start at the Hop House, we go to Great Dane Pub, and we go over to Delta, and then we come back around to the Hop House. We'll have kind of some little surprises and tasters at each spot. And a good way for people to not only check out our breweries, but get to know kind of some different routes throughout our city that they can bike on the regular themselves. So if you want to join the ride, I think we still have spots left. You can sign up at biketheberg.org. What else do we have this year? Hopefully everybody had a chance to come out to get Festive at Agora last year. We started that again last year for the first time in about 5 years. It is the kickoff to the Fitchburg Holiday Lights Tour. Again, another really popular event. And we will be bringing that back again in 2025. Again, just sharing some feedback. I think it's nice for people to hear the appreciation. Sometimes when we do things or events or the city participates, I really have to give Lisa Sanford at City Hall credit for starting and continuing to partner with us on the Holiday Lights Tour. Also Jeremy from FACTv, they go out and get great videos of this event every year. And the feedback is really overwhelming. It really is a tradition that people have appreciated. And I'm just really surprised at the engagement, happily surprised at the engagement and how many people actually take the tour and participate in voting on their favorite spot. So again, thank you to our partners at City Hall for the Holiday Lights Tour participation, and we look forward to doing that again this year. Just another kind of side note of why it's important not only to create tourism events, but to actually create a community where residents enjoy living, which usually translates to a place that visitors enjoy visiting. And so the efforts that the city makes to create, a community with assets and infrastructure, all our great parks, the pickleball courts, the splash pad, all of those things are not only enjoyed by our residents, but they are also attracting visitors. People want to visit places that people enjoy living. And that actually translates into dollars. And I won't go into the details here, but I did link the data at the bottom or the study at the bottom. But essentially, for every dollar spent on infrastructure in a community, it generates a certain amount of economic tourism dollars that continue to help the community. Let's see, I think we talked about the Bike the Bird Challenge, running an extra month this year. Already have some good competition going with that. Anybody can still sign up if they haven't yet. It's free to sign up. We're looking forward to Spring Hill Suites opening in the fall of this year. I think you've probably been hearing from Ravine. I know I talked to him last week. The roof is on the new property, so that's a good sign. Sounds like the pickleball courts have broken ground, the 4 additional ones. We look forward to having those extra ones to promote. Those are things you guys already know about. And I think that's all I got. Any questions? I went through that kind of fast.
Thank you so much. Questions from the committee? Logan.
Yeah, Angela, thank you for making time and sharing all of your work with us here. It's always impressive to see all of the work that you all do to promote Fitchburg. One question I kind of want to start with is, how do you sell Fitchburg when we have Madison next door and we have Sun Prairie on the other side of Madison? You know, what's kind of your pitch if somebody comes in and says, why Fitchburg over Sun Prairie or Cottage Grove or anywhere else in Dane County?
So, part of a lot of our marketing campaigns really highlight our proximity to Madison. We have several that's, we're Madison's backyard neighbor type of thing. And being part of the Madison region is actually a positive for us, for Fitchburg. Our location especially is something that we highlight frequently. You can stay in a Fitchburg hotel and be at a downtown Madison event quicker than if you stay in a Madison hotel on the west side or even the east side. We've got great proximity to the Lion Energy Center and all of the activity that goes on there. Obviously, our hotels are very connected with the Epic travel that takes place. And then, we sell kind of our assets. We sell the access to biking. 5 of the state's best trails run through Fitchburg. And we will provide maps and all kinds of information for you to enjoy those. We sell the location. That's key. We're really central to Dane County. You can be anywhere in Fitchburg, but you can also be anywhere in southern Wisconsin quickly with Fitchburg as your hub. So we actually see being so close to Madison as a positive.
Yeah, certainly. One other question I had as well is we have all of the different events, and being on Public Safety and Human Services, we see a lot of them come through for permits and whatnot. Is there a way we could be, and we already are, or could increase kind of our cross-pollination of some of those things? I don't know if that's, the city being more involved in kind of helping promote the next event, or, what we as alders can do. If there's some programs that we could help with, like I think I'd mentioned at one point, like at the Chamber Forum, a event postcard where you can enter for prizes if you make it to Festa Italia and to at least one concert at McKee and Agora Art Fair and that kind of thing. So just kind of curious as to what we could do from either a council level, a city staff level, or support you all in doing to, make those events even more prevalent and get as many folks out there as possible to enjoy all of them and, take it all in, whether they're used to one event, we want them to go to as many as they can.
Yeah, thanks. Well, thanks for offering. Really sharing the materials that we provide is a huge help. I know that Mayor Julia, we right now we have refrigerator magnets that list all 7 of our big events, May through September. And people really enjoy those. They throw them on their fridge and there it is. They know when the concerts are. They know when the Agora Art Fair is. So sharing those, I think there's a stack at the front desk at City Hall. I think Mayor Julia asked for them. She has some listening sessions coming up. Handing those type of things out is always really nice. Just even talking about the events or knowing about the events yourself is it's so easy for all of us to talk about the needs or what we don't have or what, but reminding ourselves to talk about what we do have and what is positive and what's really going on in the city that everyone can participate in, that's super helpful to us. We certainly share all of our information, our calendars, our newsletters, any of that can be shared. We are happy to connect people if you ever want to refer people to us to get them hooked up onto some of our visitor information, that type of thing. But really sharing the materials that we already produce. I'll tell you, we create these bike maps, printed maps. People still love them. In demand. Our partnership with Bike Fitchburg, they distribute them really all over Wisconsin. We've gone through 2,500 just between March and now. And so we'll probably print another 2,500. So, sharing the materials that we already have out there is super helpful, but then just, sharing the excitement about the events coming up is great.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
One of the things I didn't see you mention, Angela, was the farmers market on Thursdays.
Oh,
is that
sure.
something you all support as well?
We certainly support through marketing, but got to give credit to Steve Leverance and Promega on that one. But we promote it obviously in all of our materials and our marketing. And I can't say enough about our farmers market. It's a great community event weekly. We get a front row seat based on where our office is to the traffic, and I can't say enough good things about the farmers market. Not only great vendors, great space, but then there's often live music, or other events going on too. So make sure you make time on your calendar for that. That's Thursdays, every Thursday now until October 3 to 6.
3 to 6, yeah, right. I love that. I love the farmers market. I wish more people went. I think it's wonderful.
Yeah.
The other thing too I wanted to say, so I remember when we were discussing the pickleball courts a while back, I can't remember if it was probably both the original proposal and then also the expansion. I found it really helpful to have a memo from the chamber to hear from the perspective of economic development how it would support the region, to see that full picture, right? Because we make decisions based on a lot of reasons, but the economic development perspective, that big picture, is not always represented. And the chamber, I think, is a great resource for that. And I would just say I would love to hear the chamber's opinions on more things as we move forward, especially the things that really tie into economic development. So one thing that pops into mind is transit. We talk about potential of expanding Metro Transit bus system, and I'll ask you in a second for what your thoughts are on that, but we're looking at more investments and doing more extended service. We're going to have a discussion about that. We're going to talk about potentially investing in bus rapid transit, which is coming, assuming no delays, maybe as soon as 2028, and that termination point was theoretically going to be at right by McKee Farms Park. So I just love to hear your thoughts on transit in particular, and then just a general statement that we'd love to hear from you more about the issues at stake. I think it's helpful for the council to have that economic development perspective when we're making these decisions.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. Always happy to share opinions. But really, before I share opinions, I did go quickly through that slide about the economic impact of tourism. I don't really separate tourism from economic development. Tourism is one of the top 3 drivers in the state of Wisconsin in terms of our economy. And just by those numbers, you saw how significant it is in Dane County. And so when we do work that invests in our community, like I mentioned, in terms of a better place to live, a better place to work, that often translates into additional tourism activity also, and it's specifically the economic impact of that. So in terms of transportation and tourism, I will say, anything that we can do to help. You'll also notice there's over 18,000 jobs created by tourism in Dane County. There's probably a few jobs that still need to be filled. So that number's probably low in terms of need. Anything we can do to make our community more accessible, and any kind of transportation that is more accessible for people who live here to also be able to get to and from work is always a good thing for the tourism economy. I don't have, I'm going to withhold a specific comment on the specific rapid transit right now. I need to look into that a little more. When you say it stops at McKee Farms Park, does that mean it doesn't go farther west currently?
The bus rapid transit is down. The Route B is on Fish Hatchery Road. So it comes straight down Fish Hatchery Road, and the endpoint would be at Triverton and McKee, right by McKee Farms Park. Then the discussion is about increasing service on the 75 and running the 65 that goes down Sherrill Drive up to that McKee Park area to create a bit of a. Anyway, we could talk more about it. So, but I love to hear, because I think that there is a place for. I think part of that conversation should be economic development, because it puts the value of something in a broader context. And I think that message is sometimes missing, and it's not that it's not important. I think there's not as many voices that have expertise in that area that are articulating that, and that's why I think it's great when I appreciated hearing from the chamber in regards to the pickleball courts. I think that helped the context, and I would love to hear that about some of these other investments in the community.
And I'll also, again, when it comes to tourism, I will volunteer our partners. But I know that Destination Madison would always be happy to come with economic data regarding tourism or economic development in Dane County, and how that impacts all of us, and what kind of needs we have. So if you want more, I'm always happy to make those connections and have them come and bring even more data. I know I gave you a couple of slides, but they were just kind of the highlights of the data that they have available.
Thank you. Other questions from the council? I don't see any other hands online. Thank you so much, Angela. It's always nice to have you here. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. See you later.
Have a good night. Next item of agenda is item 6B, Capital Improvement Plan, CIP, and Financial Policy Guidelines with our Finance Director, Misty Dodge. But we're going to start with public comment. We have David Haight here to speak on 6B. So feel free to come to the mic. You have 3 minutes after you start speaking, and I'll let you know when your time is up.
Great, thank you. David Haight again. So I've spent a fair amount of time trying to understand the role of various entities within the city, and chief amongst them is the city council. So you're the governing body. You exercise legislative authority that's delegated directly to you by the Wisconsin State Legislature, now with substantial constraints with regard to the things that you're allowed to legislate on, but nonetheless you have a status within the sphere for which you're provided the discretion to legislate in, the same authority, the same gravitas as the Wisconsin Legislature. And the question that I have come to say is the biggest issue in the city is, why is your influence not substantial? For example, with regard to the budgets, the capital budget being one, capital budgeting occurs, a proposal is put in front of you, you review it once it's done, you review it in a very cursory manner, you tinker around the edges, and then you vote to approve it. That's not what your job is. Your job is to make difficult choices. Your job is to understand what the general policy behind the philosophy and the allocation of capital resources within the city is. It's not something that happens once a year in a small compressed time frame. It's something that you should be discussing, that you should be demanding, that you get presentations that give you the information that you need to exercise policy choices. Dollars are policy, particularly in capital improvements, because they're long-lasting, they go in the ground. Once they're there, they stay there, they cost money, and either they're an asset or they're not. Either they provide benefit that's commensurate with the cost, or they're not. And that has to be a primary goal of what you're attempting to do. You're trying to balance that. You're trying to look at what the benefits are, what are the costs. What the staff does is they look at all the information that's coming to them about what they think they need to do to satisfy where they're getting the pressure from. They typically aren't getting the most pressure from people who've lived here or who live here. It's typically from developers. And that's why a lot of these things, like there was $1 million taken away from the project on Schumann Drive for storm sewers to finish up the Cyan Road intersection a few months ago. Why do these things occur? Why are we not having more strategic discussions on a continuing basis by you? And what I'm trying to do, and what I'm going to try to do, is help ferret out best practices from other city councils and provide that information to you for your consideration on how you conduct your business. Thank you for listening. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Misty, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. So thank you, everyone, for your time tonight. So the CIP has not been released yet. The mayor's proposed CIP document should be released next week, Friday. But wanted to take some time tonight to kind of talk about context and terminology and process, just so we all kind of have the same information going into this important piece. So we're going to talk about 4 kind of big picture things tonight. So city finances and budgeting, again, 30,000-foot view, the budget constraints that we have, some comparative data resources that are available, and then what that CIP process is. So you probably noticed there's 71 slides. I promise you I will not talk about all of them, but I'm a big fan of having all that information in there. So if you want to refer back to it, or if you have questions, of course, reach out to me and we can go through it. So I will likely talk fast because that's what I do, but then also cruise through the slides pretty quickly.
And just for the council's purposes, are you okay if we do questions mid-slides?
Absolutely.
So I'll try to keep an eye out, but if there's something that I don't see you, please feel free to jump in.
Thank you. So one of the big kind of things that we need to talk about is that governmental accounting is different. So most businesses, most households have a budget, right? And you plan financially for what you're going to do. In the city of Fitchburg, we do the same thing, but our context is a little bit different. So we focus on expenditures and service levels. You know, we don't talk about profits, we don't talk about sales. We talk about expenditures and those services that we want to provide. Because of that, we have a slightly different accounting methodology that we need to follow. So if you're used to, say, corporate or personal accounting, it'll look a little bit different on the city's books. And then for the city, we have fund accounting. So we have a bunch of different funds, and think of those kind of like little mini businesses. So we keep track of the books for each one of those kind of subsections of the city. Also, fixed assets are responsibilities. So in a business, when you buy a piece of equipment, you will use it to create something or you do something. It's a revenue generator. Here in a city, a fixed asset is a responsibility because you now offered that, you have to replace it, you have to maintain it. It's a service that's provided to the community. And then we have some specialized terminology, like our annual audit report is called the Annual Comprehensive Financial Report, which will be released in a couple of weeks. But it's just a little bit different. So back on those funds, we have a bunch of different types of funds. When we're going into the CIP, we'll talk mostly about the debt service fund, the capital projects fund, and then the enterprise funds, which are the utilities. I included some terminology stuff in here, but wanted to pause for a second on the assessed value tax rate. So property tax bills are based on the assessed value tax rate. What we do is we take the total services that the council wants to provide. We figure out what the cost of that is. We subtract all of the other revenues the city generates, state aids, user fees, that types of thing. And whatever that difference is, in order to fund what you want to fund, we have to tax that as our property tax levy. And so the property tax levy is that total amount of property taxes we need to collect in order to fund our budget. And so then how that's allocated to all of the bills is based on that assessed value tax rate. So for last year, the AV tax rate was about $5.80 per $1,000 of assessed value. The average home was the $457,800. And so you can see the formula that we use to get into the city's portion of that average home tax bill is $2,654. And then we do the same exercise with multifamily apartments, because even though renters often don't pay a property tax bill directly to the city, that bill or that cost is still passed on in rent. So we do look at those as well.
Is this also called, people call it the mill rate? Is that the same?
Yes. Yep. So there's still assessed value mill rate and equalized value mill rate, but mill rate would be the tax rate. Yes.
Thank you.
So there's a few different pages from the budget that I think are helpful. So this one is the city taxes on an average home, so you can kind of see how that has changed. And it shows also what the average value and that tax rate has done over the past several years. And so it's not terribly surprising that as values are increasing, our tax rate is dropping. And so the actual impact on the average home is kind of the difference between those two. This is another great page out of the budget that shows for that average home calculation or property tax amount, how much of that bill is spent on each of the different functions within the city. So the administration, finance, police, fire, public works, all of that is split out here, including debt service, capital projects, etc. So that's a helpful page. And then again, we do the same for apartments. Wanted to include...
Can I ask a question, Misty?
Absolutely.
Going back to that slide. Can you talk about the differences between debt service and capital projects? I'm not sure if I ever really fully absorbed that before.
Yeah. So capital projects is a separate fund. That's where we account for most of our capital projects. So whether it's funded by cash or grants or borrowed money, the actual purchase of the asset and the money coming in to pay for that asset is in the capital projects fund. If we borrow money to pay for it, then those annual repayments of that debt is in the debt service fund. And so we will levy property taxes in order to make that principal and interest payment out of the debt service fund.
Got it. But it's all ultimately, that debt service is a payment on something that was used for typically a capital project, or always a capital
Always
project.
capital projects.
Yeah, so it's just a after the fact payment. And the other thing too that I think you've talked about, and maybe you'll get into this later, but that the reason we take on, one of the reasons we take on debt is to spread the impact of a purchase on future homeowners that are going to utilize that service, and not just have it all on the tax rolls for the current homeowners. Is that an accurate representation?
Yep. So it's called intergenerational equity. So there's two ways you can do it. One is when you borrow money, you borrow it at year one and then you pay it over 20 years. And so those 20 years worth of property taxes are collected to pay that back. Another strategy that we use a lot in our CIP is kind of the same structure, but in reverse, where we cash finance things by saving, if it's a 20-year asset, we would save 1/20th of the value each year, so that when the time comes to replace it, we have the cash available to do so. The benefit of doing it that way is you still have that intergenerational equity, right? You're still having people pay for it over the life of the asset. But then it's cheaper because you're not borrowing money, you're not paying interest, you're not paying issuance costs. And then it also just shows the value of the status quo that's there.
I just always thought that was interesting about debt, because I think people always think about debt in the personal context, and in a municipal context, that actually there's value in terms of spreading that cost for future taxpayers as well. Any other questions, Bill?
Yeah. So regarding the debt fund, is there a breakdown of what the major components of that debt are every year?
Yes. So in the operating budget, there will be a debt schedule that's in there that shows you all the different issuances we've made, what the balance was, as of 2 years ago, the principal payments, and then the new balance, and then the budgeted year principal payments. So yes, you'd be able to see all of that detail in there.
So, but that's like the year and the amount, not the projects that it paid for, right?
Oh, correct. No.
Okay,
Nope.
so there's no way, if we have, if we just look at that total debt number, we don't know how much of that is library versus PD facility versus whatever.
Nope. So you could get that to an extent from the CIP document, but then when we issue debt as well, that's when we would lay out what those intended projects are. But as you've seen recently, I've had to kind of shift some things around, so that would be following it through the resolutions.
One more question for me too. So the police station is one thing that we talk about quite a lot. It's a huge capital investment. Can you talk a little bit about, I know we've already borrowed some of that money, and that is the plan to borrow all of the rest of it through GO debt or general obligation debt, or do we have other plans for financing that aside from debt?
So we issued about $9 million worth of debt in 2024. About $8 million of that was for the police facility. But there's a resolution going through council now to redirect some of that borrowed money because the project was delayed, so we're not spending it fast enough. So there's some nuance, I guess, to my answer. Yes, the plan is to borrow for the remaining cost of that project. Probably not in 2025 because we've gotten burned with projects being delayed and having to do the shuffle. So I will probably borrow for that in 2026 once the bids are let and we have a better handle on kind of what that payment schedule is going to look like.
But that $8 million that we've already borrowed, that is already factored into people's tax bill.
Correct.
Misty, could you explain then, just for my benefit and the benefit of folks who may be watching, why we wouldn't just sit on that money? I know you've explained that before, but why would we not just say, oh, we borrowed this money, can we just leave it in our checking account essentially and gather interest for a couple of years until we actually do break ground?
Yep. So the federal government got wise to that in the relatively recent future, and so now there's an arbitrage rebate that's required if you do that. So because we borrow money on a tax exempt basis, the federal government is not getting tax money based on that interest that we're paying out. And so there are very specific rules that say how fast we have to spend the money and how much interest we're able to earn on that money. If we earn too much and we don't spend it fast enough, then we have to share the amount that we earn in interest with the federal government. So yes, we can to an extent. There's a period of time where we can just hold it relatively liquid and we earn that interest and we put it towards the projects. But if it's too high, we have to share it. Excellent. So another page out of the budget is the property tax levy history. One thing I'd like to note real quick is the years are always a little funky. So the 2024 tax roll would be bills issued based on 1/1/24 assessed values, issued in December of 24, paid in 2025 to fund the 2025 budget. So on this chart, when I say 24, it's based on tax roll year, but it's actually the 2025 budget. And you can see how that has enhanced over the last 15 years. When we talk about the CIP process that we're kicking off, we really are going to focus on that green and purple bar, the debt service fund and the capital projects fund. And then come operating budget time, which is after CIP is adopted, that's when we really focus on the blue and the red bar and the transit too. So if you look at the past 10 years, overall it's been a 6.3% per year average increase in total levy. For the general fund, it's been about 5.8% per year increase. For debt service, it's 5.5% per year average. The capital projects is 13.1% per year. And the library is a 5% per year average increase. I did want to tangent for a second about tax incremental financing because the DOR recently put together this really cool graphic, which I thought is a really nice visual way to explain how TIDs work because we get a lot of those questions. We won't necessarily talk about it much during the CIP process, but thought this was a chance for me to at least get this graphic in front of people. So what it does is it shows the timeline of the TID being created kind of along the bottom and what the property values is along the top. So at the time the TID's created, this bottom portion of the graphic shows that base value. And so all of that property, when they pay taxes, would go to the county, the school, the tech college, and the municipality. And when we create a TID, that stays the same. So that base value continues to pay taxes into that overlying jurisdiction as is. But as the value grows within the district, because development happens, new buildings happen, the value is created, that's when that triangle comes into effect, and all the taxes that are paid by that new development is diverted into the TID project fund, and funds cost according to the TID project plan in order to encourage that development to happen. So that green triangle there is that money that's diverted to the TID fund to pay those costs, which allowed that development to happen. And then at the time the TID terminates, all of the taxes now go to all of the overlying jurisdictions. And so you can see the benefit would be if the development would not happen except for or but for the TID, the municipality, for example, that light blue, would have only gotten that much property tax revenue. Instead, now they're getting more because there's this development that happened. Mm-hmm.
It's important to note, though, during the period of the TID, the city has to maintain that area. We have to plow the streets. We have to ride police and fire. The tax. That cost gets lost. In the end, we made this much. Well, no, I as a taxpayer and you as taxpayers, we're paying to take care of that property, even though the city, the money was going to pay back our, the bond essentially to build it, but we were paying O&M expenses on it during that whole time.
Absolutely. So the cost of providing services to that new residents, new commercial development, all of that is absorbed by the rest of the city while the TID is open. Then once the TID closes, half of the value is required to go to tax abatement to reduce taxes for everybody across, because it is a long-term strategy. It's a long-term investment when you talk about TID. But absolutely, in that time when it's open, all the additional roads still need to be plowed. That's absorbed by the rest of the city.
But during the life of the TID, don't we increase the amount of taxes going to those overlying jurisdictions? I mean, there's talk about, looking at the value in the city TID out versus TID in, and when it comes time to calculating the property taxes. So am I remembering that correctly?
So no, so the jurisdictions would still get the taxes based on the base value, but any of that new value, they pay the same tax rate as everybody else, but that taxes does not go to the overlying jurisdictions. Is there a piece I'm missing?
Okay, so I think when we open a TID, that requires approval from all the overlying jurisdictions, right?
Correct.
But I thought that was also the case that we would, like, when it comes to factoring in the taxes that everyone pays, like the rest of the county or something like that, essentially makes up for the lack of property taxes that are going to pay the project expenses. Is that something I just dreamed up?
So you could be thinking about at the closure of the TID, if there's extra money, we share it with all of the overlying jurisdictions. If the TID is unsuccessful and there's a loss, the city has to absorb that. But if there's a gain, we share that with everyone. The other thing you could be thinking of is, I know there's a nuance in the school calculations that I think they get more state aid to make up some difference, but that's where I'm out of my depth. So is that maybe what?
Possibly, yeah. Okay. I thought there was some sort of compensating factor because, like if there was a TIF district that's got a lot of residences in it, it would be crazy to think that people could move in there and their kids could go from pre-K through 12th grade and essentially none of their property taxes would go toward their schooling. And I thought there were, I'll look into it and see if I can figure out where I was getting that from.
Right. And so that is part of why talking TID philosophy, generally residential development is not something you would want to TID incentivize, because there is a lot of service requirements when you have new residents that come in. Generally, you would do a TID incentive for an employer or for a large commercial piece, not as much as residential because of that exact point.
Could we do sometime on one of probably this meeting, like TIF 201? I feel like I could pass 101.
That's on the list.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
Or TIF philosophy. That would be good. So yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then there was a TIF 101 presentation, July 2018, Cow, if you wanted to go back and watch that on FACTv. It's actually a great one right before the prior Ehlers consultant retired. He went through all of our TIDs and talked kind of history stuff, so that's interesting too. But absolutely, happy to chat. Move on. One other kind of interesting piece is personal property tax was repealed. So lots of people noticed that they didn't get a personal property tax bill this last time, and that was on purpose. It didn't get lost in the mail. There was a new state aid program, though, that backfilled that. So at least that shift from personal property to other property didn't cause other properties to absorb that lost tax revenue. The state picked that up. And then purpose. So we're going into the capital improvement plan process. So the capital costs are things that are $10,000 individually. So one piece of something would need to be $10,000 to qualify as capital. Or if you have a group of things that cost $50,000 or more as a total and are purchased very infrequently, that could also be considered capital for this purpose. So when we're looking at the CIP, it is big dollar projects. So it's new facilities, pieces of equipment, roads, that type of a thing. Also, we do a 10-year CIP. I'll say the first 5 years, year 1 through 5, are vetted projects. These are things that are decent chance they will change as far as timing and cost and that stuff, but are very likely to happen still at some point. And then there's the back 5, years 6 through 10, which really have not been vetted. They're kind of placeholder projects, so you know that they're coming, but it's just an awareness piece. It's not something that we are even confident will actually move forward in the process, but wanted to have people aware of them. And then we use the CIP, so this will get adopted at a council meeting. That will then, all those projects in that first year will get put into the first draft of the budget that goes to the mayor. So that's kind of our baseline context when we go into the budget process. But it's helpful to get these big pieces kind of out of the way so that we can focus on the rest of the budget when that process comes. Talking of the annual, yep.
Every year when the CIP is reviewed, how many of the items in there do we adjust based on inflation and whatever factors go into the purchase of those items? Because I kind of feel like some of the stuff in the back half is just kind of moved over a column, but not adjusted. And then as it creeps forward, suddenly there might be a big spike and we wonder why that was the case.
Mm-hmm. In theory, when projects are put into the CIP, it should be based on what we think the cost will be when the time comes. So there should be an inflationary assumption in there, but I'll say we are never right on that. Like inflation always is a wild card, especially these days. So that's why you'll still see some pretty significant swings. For the replacement funds and for a lot of the other projects, we assume a 3% inflationary item, though you'll see some fire equipment in particular, there's like 6% or 8% inflationary assumptions in there, and that would be listed specifically on that project.
Misty, if we put the number, that's what we're going to borrow to do it. Do we ever, I think we should list what the total cost is going to be, that borrowing at such a percent over 20 years, I think that gets lost. It's only this much. No, it's 2 or 3 times that.
Yeah, definitely appreciate the point. It does get challenging because we don't know what rate we'll borrow for and all of that stuff too. We talk about it a little bit during the financial management plan. So that will be a presentation at our next committee of the whole meeting in June, where they'll come out and say, if the mayor's proposed CIP is adopted just as is, this is what it would mean for the levels of borrowing, how much we'd pay in interest, what the tax rate would need to be to pay that back. All of that is kind of talked at that higher level. But you're right, we don't get into it on the specific project piece.
In my field, you were always current value of money, future value of money. We always needed to look at what was going to be the real cost of the thing by the time we're done with it.
Right.
With our most recent debt issuance, which is the first one we had with a AAA bond rating, am I correct in that?
Yep.
Can you talk a little bit about what our rates are? Because I think people also think about debt from a personal perspective, and we are so different because we are issuing the debt versus, and so it's just such a different process. Could you just talk a little bit about that and kind of what our rates are?
Absolutely. So when the city issues debt, we do get a much more attractive interest rate than what, even the Dodge family would get on our own for a couple of reasons. One, when we issue debt, it's called general obligation debt, which means it has the full backing of the city government to levy the taxes it needs to make that payment. So when you guys authorize me to issue debt and you sign the dotted line, you are saying we promise that we will increase taxes as needed to make these debt payments. So it's a very easy credit risk. The city's not going away. We will always have this taxing authority for debt payments. So it's a low risk environment. When it's low risk, the people we're borrowing money from are willing to get less in interest because they know that they're going to get it back. And then the Moody's rating, yes, and I do have a slide on there too to brag a little bit more. We were AAA this year, which was amazing. Just another reiteration that we are low risk. And the lower risk we are, the less we have to pay in interest. The other piece of it too is it is tax exempt debt is what we mostly issue. All of our current debt is all tax exempt, which means the person that's lending us the money doesn't have to pay taxes on the interest that we're paying them. So again, they're willing to take a lower rate because they don't have to pay that taxes. So those couple of different things give us a very attractive borrowing rate. When we borrowed, it was a little over 2%, I believe. I'd have to go back to look for sure. The bond market, of course, is a little jittery right now, too, so I don't know what it will be when we do issue debt again in 2025, but it's definitely a more attractive rate than what you'd be able to get commercially.
And the other thing, too, that we might get more into this, but the CIP, especially for people that are new, there's a great, each page of the project says where the money is coming from, because it's not necessarily debt. It could be from the general fund, it could be from grant funding, and obviously that's only an estimate, right, because we don't always necessarily know, but I think it's important for people that source of revenue is helpful, both in the CIP and also the budget. It's not always obvious.
Absolutely.
Are we only issuing fixed rate debt?
Correct. Yep. And we do competitive exclusively. There's an option to do a negotiated, but we always do competitive too. And because of our great credit rating and our great reputation, we often get a lot of bids. So again, really good rates that way. Moving on. Real quick, I know we're not talking about the budget, but after the CIP, we will go into the budget. So again, we say, what level of service do we want to provide? What's the cost of that? How are we going to fund it? And then this is how much in property taxes we need to collect in order to fund our budget. And then the assessed values are how we allocate that to each individual property owner. I have another presentation, I'll be back in a few months, which will talk about all of that stuff a little bit more detailed. But we don't need to know that at this point for capital improvement plan.
Misty?
Absolutely.
So when you state that the levy is decided based on the level of service we want to provide, there is also the important constraint imposed upon us by the state, right? So this is not just that the council can do whatever they want. Right, so
correct.
I mean that's an important asterisk to the slide.
That's the next section, actually.
Okay.
Yep. So we have 5 different budget constraints I'd like to talk about quickly. So first is, of course, the taxpayer ability and willingness to pay. Because when the council adopts a budget and you say this is how much property taxes we need to collect, it is collecting it from our property owners. So we always need to kind of keep that in mind too, what the ability and willingness to pay additional taxes are. And I know all of you know, but I'll just remind everyone, even though the property tax bill is mailed by the city and is collected by my staff through January, only about 1/3 of it is actually to fund the city's budget. So that chart is from the insert that goes with each of the property tax bills. The next constraint would be the expenditure restraint incentive program. I'll say this is an optional program, but we have committed to participating in this program for the past several years. Ultimately, it's an aid program where if we constrain our spending to certain calculations and formulas set by the state, which talks about in here, then the state will give us a payment, an aid payment. And so this chart here shows you kind of the history of what we've gotten over the past several years. You'll notice it was really high recently, as high as $750,000, which was applied to the 2024 budget. Going into the 2027 budget, I think it's going to drop to about $200,000. I could tell you about all the reasons why it's dropping, but ultimately it comes down to our tax rate is dropping pretty quickly. And frankly, at some point in the relatively near future, I don't think we'll even be eligible for this program. But it's something to work on.
Misty? So the fact that the real estate market continues to climb at crazy rates much higher than inflation, that means that our mill rate has to go down because we're only allowed to collect so much money. So is that really like the state legislature is okay with that? They're like, well, if the market goes up, then you're just not going to qualify.
So they haven't changed the rules in a long time. But one of the baseline rules is you have to have a mill rate of at least $5 per $1,000 of equalized value. So it's equalized instead of assessed. And we were at $5.45 this last year. So you can see we're getting really close to that threshold.
Well,
but
yeah,
to your
I mean,
point,
everything went up 10%, and 10% of this would bring us down potentially to just below 5.
Right. And so to your point, the more that inflation is, or equalized values or inflation in the housing market is accelerating more than our levy limits allow us to increase, the faster our rate is dropping and the likelihood that we will probably not be eligible for this program much longer. We are by far not the only community that's running into this. There's a lot of communities that have fallen in the last couple of years. There's talk about changing this program, but it would require legislation and coming to terms about what that program would look like in the future. So at this point, I'm assuming that it continues kind of as is, and that's where I'm saying we will likely not be eligible in the near future.
So do you have any sort of a feel for, what fraction of municipalities in Wisconsin have already fallen below and how many are probably going to fall below in the next couple of years?
So I don't know that for sure now. I'm going to guess that there's information that could provide that on like the Wisconsin Policy Forum would probably be one. And they put out a list of who all receives expenditure restraint payments. So we could see who the people are and try to compare them. But I just know anecdotally, talking to other finance directors, that there's a lot of people that are falling off. The big one, I guess first back up. So for expenditure restraint, the amount of money we spend on capital does contribute towards that program and is part of that calculations. But because we have a lot of strategies built into our budget, I'm not concerned about qualifying for it as long as our tax rate stays high enough in the near future. So it's something that I need to keep in the back of my mind, but it's not something that we need to focus on during this process. The big one that we do need to, though, is the state-imposed levy limits. This is a statute, so we are not allowed to go over. If we do, let's say, make a mistake and we go over levy limits, the state will take it back from us dollar for dollar out of our state aid. So not only is it illegal under statutes, it's also disincentivized because at the end of the day it would be no extra money. The bulk of levy limits is based on net new construction. This is a chart that shows that 3% kind of inflation estimate, which is just what Misty always uses in her head, is that orange line. And you can see what our net new construction has done over the past several years. And we have had some great years, which has been really helpful to help kind of absorb the increasing costs of status quo. But the flaw in levy limits is that it doesn't consider that the new value that created that net new construction also needs to get provided services. So it really, in recent years, most of that net new construction has gone to pay for inflationary status quo. And going into the 2026 budget, we don't expect that we will hit 3%.
So Misty, just to kind of clarify on that then, if we're growing by 2% and inflation is 3%, we're not even keeping pace with what we would need if we didn't grow, and yet now we have even more people to serve with that. So we have been dealing with this for a significant period of time, and it's just getting worse and worse and worse, not just for Fitchburg, but for others. Am I correct in that?
Absolutely. Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The other
So
thing,
if anybody knows anybody at the state legislature, I'd love to get their ear. So.
well, the other thing about it is that I get that question a lot, like why would you continue to grow if you're having trouble? But what's interesting is that because we're growing, we've been able to stay ahead or at inflation. So at least you've been able to maintain services. Whereas if we hadn't grown, because there are communities like Monona where they didn't grow at all, their net new construction was near zero. And so they're not doing, cost of living adjustments for their staff. They're not doing just merit raises. They're not doing anything. Then they have to absorb retirement increases and healthcare increases. So they're just like getting squeezed again and again. We at least were able to stay ahead of inflation, which is probably not going to be true going forward, given the reality of the world and how we can only grow so much. But it's just interesting because the growth has actually helped us stay ahead. And I think that's a misunderstood thing because it's confusing, right? I get why it's misunderstood, but that's what I try to tell people. It's like the inflation the net new construction has helped us be as good as we are today.
I wouldn't say it gets us ahead, but it allows us to keep up at least enough.
At least maintain the level of service.
Exactly.
But we're just hitting a wall.
Yeah, you both took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to use the word maintain as well in this whole conversation. Without the growth that we've had, and we're certainly very fortunate to have the growth that we're having from a budgetary perspective, that does simply allow us to maintain the existing service levels that we are offering our community, and to a large extent, many, if not most of our community have grown to, I don't know if expect is the right word, but probably highly appreciate. And if we go to no growth, whether by policy or by economic downturn, it is clear that there will be significant service reductions that would be necessary in order to make the budget balance. There's just no way around it.
Okay.
Davidson.
That gets thrown around a lot, Chad. It's never been concrete. You give the people an option. You say, all right, well, if you don't vote for this, we're gonna have service. But it's never. They're never told what are they going to be. We're just scaring them. If you say yes, we won't have as good a police and fire, or we won't be able. You lay those out, then people can make an informed decision. I don't like the scare tactic. Well, if you don't vote for this, there will be reduced services. You got to tell them what they would be. I guess is.
I don't offer it as a scare tactic.
I know, but
I just want to be clear that that's not the intent of me bringing it up. I'm just obviously want to be very, very frank that without growth, there would have to be service reductions. And obviously, I'm not in a position to determine those reductions. That is what the Common Council would do, probably with staff recommendation, or at least input from staff on where potentially to make those cuts or reductions. And I think to your point, Alder Herbst, if there were to be another future referendum that was literally a cost to continue referendum, one of the strategies the Common Council may wish to consider would be to identify where they would intend to make those service cuts, to your point, so that people were fully informed of what a no vote might actually mean for them and what they feel about those services that were going to be reduced. So, yeah.
I think that's the ticket to all I'm saying. I'm not disagreeing with you about growth. I'm just saying. That's a good point.
When I talk to people about this, I just explain that the state legislature does not believe that inflation exists, right? So if you have zero growth forevermore, you can collect exactly the same amount of taxes in every subsequent year. So if you collect $1 million this year, you'll collect $1 million 30 years from now, and everybody can remember how much things cost 30 years ago versus today, and what things might cost 30 years into the future. But the buying power of the dollar will never go up over time.
Exactly.
It's all the more reason that it's important that you're here, Misty.
Yeah, there you go. And so just to summarize, it's exactly what you guys were saying, but I use kind of the seesaw example, right? So you've got net new construction, 2 to 3%, kind of the ballpark that we are hopefully going to be in. But then you've got inflation, just at a normal 2 to 3%. You've got additional inflationary pressures, as we know, seen over the past several years, and then those additional needs that need to be addressed too. So there's this unbalanced teeter-totter there. And so then I do have an example in here as far as, what it would look like if you didn't have any growth, and just to try to visualize by chart that would be a problem. And we talked about the flaw. So then there's some other resources in here if you're interested in learning more. Moving on, maintenance of effort. So this was a new law that we need to comply with now. I've submitted one report about 6 months ago, which was based on trends, and in the next few weeks I need to submit the report based on 23 versus 2024. This was a requirement in order to help get that increased shared revenue legislation across the line. So we do have this maintenance of effort requirement. It looks at actual numbers. So it's only for public safety. So police have to certify that at least one of these three things has been maintained, and fire and EMS has to certify that at least two of those four things have been maintained from 1 year to the next. So looking strictly at police, for as an example, it's a number of sworn officers, but it is employed, not budgeted. So that can get messy when you have vacancies or you're trying to fill positions but can't. Then there's property taxes spent on sworn officers. Again, it's spent, not budgeted. So if you have vacancies and things, that can get complicated. And then the percentage of property tax levy spent on sworn officers. EMS and fire have a couple of other categories as well that we can qualify for. I'll say while this is a new requirement, I recognize there's some nuances with it that we'll need to work around. I don't expect that to be a problem for us in the near future because we do know that cost of living adjustments have been included and health insurance increases are going, and we continue to try to recruit our talented people. So I don't expect maintenance of effort to be an issue, but it is something that we also need to keep on the radar. And if we don't qualify, it's a 15% penalty of our shared revenue.
And Misty, I think you kind of implied it, kind of almost said it explicitly, but this is strictly non-debt service spending, right? So the fact that we're building a $40 million police facility is not going to get us the requirement here. The fact that we buy a new $1 million worth of fire trucks has no bearing on this.
Correct. So on the fire and EMS side, it specifically says it's non-capital expenditures. And on the police side, it talks about employees. So it doesn't even include, training and gas and all the other things.
Are we going to talk about state aid at all? Is that so we save that for the budget presentation?
We usually talk about that at the budget presentation. I have a little bit in here, but we do get a portion of our budget from state aid.
And we're going to get an annual increase now under the new agreement.
Yeah, one of the great things is, and kudos to Tony in particular at the league, they were able to negotiate this historic increase in shared revenue. Not only was it a significant increase that helped us bridge the gap for that 1 year, it does not solve all of our problems, but then they tied it to 1 cent of the sales tax. And so as the economy grows and sales tax collections grow, our aid should grow as well. So it's at least tied somewhat to the economy.
Because it was the same for 10 years plus. Yep. Yeah, it was the exact same number.
Yeah. Some, yes, but
almost.
If I could clarify, Misty, I do believe was our increase in aid about $25,000 from the supplemental aid in the last year over year. Is that correct?
From the inflationary piece, yes.
Yeah.
Yep. So it was 4.3 or something like that percent increase. When if you look at how much aid we get, it was in that ballpark.
Sure. So just want to kind of put an actual dollar amount to what that increase is, and then it's my understanding, and again, if you could please confirm, Misty, that each 2-year budget cycle at the state level will identify what the next 2 years of supplemental aid will be, including the year-over-year increase, correct?
Yep, because it's all based on I think it's the LAB's estimate of what sales tax growth is going to be. Mm-hmm. Adopted financial guidelines is one of our other big constraints. We just updated these, not last night, but the meeting before. So we have these financial guidelines in order to demonstrate our long-term financial focus. It provides that foundation so we can make sure we're making good financial decisions, and then it's just guardrails for us to make sure we're being fiscally sustainable. I promised you a AAA slide. I am so proud of the AAA that the city has earned. Worked so hard over so many years and so many councils making diligent, responsible decisions. Being able to get this AAA rating has been fantastic. It's that kind of gold star that we can tout to everybody, as I often do, but it also decreases the amount of interest we have to pay on our debt because we're even less of a credit risk. So people are open to earning even less of an interest rate from us. And it was actually last week, Friday, was the year anniversary when we got this notice. So Mike Zimmerman and I had a sleeve of Thin Mints to celebrate. So,
from my Girl Scouts?
Probably, actually. And then we texted you, Chad, too, I think. It's like, hey, AAA Day.
So
happy anniversary.
There was Ellers actually, with one of the analysis, actually said almost about how much we saved. It was something like
it was a lot.
in the hundreds of $100,000+ of saved maybe more than that.
Yeah. I remember it was when we issued the debt. They said this is kind of what it would have been if we were still the AA1, and it was in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. I don't exactly remember the number.
Yeah, it was impressive.
It was a lot.
Yeah.
Are other cities in Dane County, do they have any other cities in our county have the AAA rating?
So City of Madison does.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
And
I think
how
that
does our
might be the only one. And then I know Brookfield is New Berlin. And then a couple other people. It's like a handful of municipalities in Wisconsin that have earned this rating.
and how does our AAA rating compare with that of, say, the United States overall?
I am not going to answer that question, but I understand what you're asking. Yep. So definitely something for us to be proud of, and something that we need to make sure that we now hold ourselves or continue to hold ourselves to this high standard.
It would be nice to know, as we issue the debt for the police station, what the difference would be if we did not have that rating. That is something that would be worth publicizing, how much we're saving.
We had it in that 2024 issuance. I can get that number. And then when we borrow again in 2026, likely, we'll be able to have it at that point too. Absolutely. Other guidelines that were included, most of which were the same as what they were before, just kind of reorganized. But in general, we try to cash finance anything that is $500,000 or less. That's kind of what's considered our threshold for when cash financing versus borrowed financing makes sense for us. And we did meet that. And that's important because the more money we borrow, the more we have to pay to borrow that money, and then interest costs as well. We also had a guideline about the structure of our debt, where we want to avoid those balloon payments at the end. We don't want to be kicking that can down the road. We want to make sure we have relatively stable debt structure, which we have. So 63.6% of our outstanding debt will be paid between 2025 and 2034. So we do have some that extends into year 11 through 20, but for the most part, the bulk of our debt is paid in 10 years. One of our metrics would be we want to have an equalized tax rate for debt service of no more than $2.25 per $1,000 of value. That's important because that's kind of like the mortgage payment. So if you are a homeowner or interested in home ownership, having that mortgage payment and what you can afford is important, not just kind of the value of the house. And for us, we were at 91 cents per thousand of EV, which is great. I know that also looks like we could borrow a bunch of more money, which, while it would be true, does not necessarily mean it's a good idea. So just throwing that out there. We also have a policy, this one actually is in the ordinances, I believe, versus statute. So statute says that we are allowed to borrow or have outstanding debt of 5% of our equalized value. The city further constrained ourselves to be 3% of total equalized value, so that if there's something that comes up or, the market completely drops, we're not falling outside of statute. And so it gives us that flexibility for those uncertain things. And we did meet that. Our 2024 actual amount was 0.99% of our equalized value. So we're at about a third of the metric amount and 20% of the statute limit. So that's sitting pretty good. One of our other debt metrics is debt expense as a ratio of the operating budget. We want that to be between 15 and 25%. The reason why that's important is if it's too high, it means the city is too leveraged. We're too dependent upon debt. And we are at 17.9% with the 2025 budget. So right within there. Fund balance is another guideline that we talk a lot about. So this is kind of like your emergency fund, your rainy day fund. There's 5 different categories of fund balance under government accounting rules, and I listed that chart out here. We do have assigned fund balance. You can see the different categories that we have assigned. So this is money that we set aside kind of outside of our emergency fund, saying we know these things are coming or we want to be able to plan for them. And so we set that money kind of to the side. And then we look at what's left. So that unassigned fund balance, we want to be between 15 and 25% of total general fund revenues. That's important because if there's unexpected events or if we have cash flow issues or even just being able to cash flow things, we want to have that flexibility there. And at the end of 2024, we were at 15.1%. So that is a pretty significant drop from other years, but that was intentional. And this is a story that I tell to Moody's each time we meet with them, and I feel perfectly comfortable explaining this to them again. We were outside of our policy, or higher than what we needed to be, and we have been systematically and intentionally applying that fund balance to one-time projects in the capital projects fund. So it's, again, very deliberate, very sustainable practice that we're doing, but we are just at that 15.1% as of the end of 2024. The new guidelines we had was for the enterprise funds. So this is how many days on cash we have. This is important because the utilities also need to be financially stable and responsible and able to react to things that come up. And our actual was quite a bit higher for some of the utilities than what that minimum guideline was. This is great, right? It puts the utilities in a good position. It's also partially because there's a lot of capital projects coming in the near future, and so we're accumulating that cash in order to pay for those projects soon. I have a bunch of slides in here with comparative data sources, so there's so much data available for people that want to get into it. Wisconsin Policy Forum has a lot of really good information. You can compare us to other communities, either ones we specifically select or all of the state. The Department of Revenue also has a dashboard that's available that can compare a lot of information. Again, look at us in totals or compare us to other communities. CIP process and next steps. So the CIP, as I mentioned, will get released hopefully on Friday. So we started with what the last CIP that was adopted by the council during the budget for 2025. We start there as our starting point. Department heads look at that information, provide recommendations on things that need to change or be tweaked or added or removed. They share that information and provide it to the mayor. The mayor then decides what she wants to include in her proposal. And there's reports in the CIP that shows you exactly what changed from the last adopted one to the mayor's proposal. So you could see exactly what's been modified. She'll present that. Then we have the department head presentations coming up. Hopefully you're able to attend. And then that June committee of the whole is the financial management plan review where Ellers will come again. And they say if the mayor's proposed plan is adopted as is, this is what tax rate does. This is how much we'll borrow. This is, what our guidelines will be, all of that, just to give you a big picture view of what it would look like. Council amendments are then due on July 21st. So you'll want to submit those to me using the form that I will email out when the CIP goes out. The form is split into, what you want to change and why you want to change it. And then I ask that we kind of work together to make sure that the numbers match and that it's clear what you're proposing. I then collect those, I put them into a document. Staff can put in a context memo if there's information we want to make sure you're aware of as you're making the decision about whether to make the change or not. And we'll get a packet out to you guys, and then you'll adopt the CIP on August 12th. One of the differences between the CIP process and the budget process is we do the voting on the amendments the same night that we vote on the actual CIP itself at a regularly scheduled council meeting, because there's not usually as many amendments for a CIP as there would be for budget. So we do ask that council, if you're interested in changing something, you fill out that form. The biggest reason why is to make sure that they are transparent, right? We want to make sure that you have the information you need to make a good decision. But we also want the public to be aware that these conversations are happening so that they can weigh in if they agree or disagree with what's being amended. So that's why it's important that all of those amendments are outlined ahead of time, and we don't accept amendments from the floor because we want them to be fully vetted. That being said, we can amend amendments. It's like if you put in an amendment to change one of the projects from this year to this year, as a body you could say, we don't want to do that, we want to do it to another different year. That's allowed. So amendments to amendments are okay. but we at least would make sure everybody knew that we're talking about that project, and if they're interested, they should come participate in the conversation. And then once we have that adopted CIP, it goes into the first version of the mayor's proposed operating budget, though she is able to still make changes to it. So just because it's in the CIP doesn't mean that it's exactly going to make it into the operating budget, but any changes would have to be specifically identified so that you would be aware that those changes were made.
Yeah, so I just wanted to talk a little bit in terms of the CIP. It's such an important process for the city and obviously helps us plan since these are the important built environment of our city, right? And so much of the large expenses that we spend. But I do think there's a misunderstanding about the process because we're talking about these big picture numbers, and I think sometimes people will see something in the CIP and they think that we've allocated that money or spent that money already, where it's really just a planning document. And yeah, I will reiterate what you already said, but that first year, anything for 2026 is going to be part of the first draft of the mayor's budget. So anything in that year is really supposed to be very realistic, at least at some level. So advancing something from year 10 into 2026 would be, I don't know, maybe not advisable. Depends on the situation, right? Because we haven't necessarily vetted that, which is why there kind of is that march forward of over the years. That first 5 years is kind of more in the realm of possibility, and in the back 5 years, and I'm the kind of person that would put things in the back 5 years to kind of get them on staff radar. I've done that before, but I think it's important from putting together an amendment standpoint to think through that pretty carefully, and that putting something in 2026 is really important, right? Because it's going to inform the budget, and that's going to hit our budget in a few months when we actually put that together. So I just think that's important to think about. But also the thing is that although the 2026 year is going to be incorporated into the budget, obviously subject to changes, none of that money has been allocated. This is just a plan. And that anything that's sitting in 2028, we haven't spent millions of dollars on it. We've spent $0. We just have a plan, and we're starting to look at the financial management to make sure that we can afford that, or at least we can anticipate what the cost for that would be, which is what Ellers helps us do. So I just wanted to say that's what the capital improvement plan is, and I do think sometimes it's confusing, and I just wanted to make that clear and also give a little of my opinion guidance for our new alders.
If I may enhance that just a little bit. So yes, the CIP is a plan, and then when it goes into the budget, that's when the funds are appropriated, which means you are telling staff, hey, we want you to do these things, you need to get moving on it. But then it's not actually spent until the purchasing piece is accomplished, which depending on the dollar amount and the situation would possibly come back to council again, but generally only those larger things. So it's planning, appropriation, and then spending are kind of the three different phases.
And I looked up my notes from May of 2024, and we saved about $100,000 with that AAA bond rating.
Yeah. And that was only for a third of the police facility, right? Like we've got some big dollars that we're going to be borrowing under the CIP soon.
Yep.
Yeah, that was $100,000 off of the $9 million we borrowed or issued, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly. So we did already kind of talk about the replacement funds, so I won't talk about them now.
I did have a question on that. So
of course.
Right now is our policy that we're either going to pay with something with replacement funds or we're going to pay for it with debt. There's no in between where we set aside some amount of replacement fund knowing that we're also going to have to spend some, issue some debt to pay off the remainder of it.
So not that I'm aware of. So generally we go in one of those two buckets. I think there's some more isolated situations where it's like a one-off that we might budget for it standalone and not plan for that subsequent replacement. But the council has done a really great job of trying to identify what those future costs are going to be going forward. So those are few and far between.
Could we go through the replacements fund slide? I know
Sure.
we've mentioned it, but this is a pretty complicated, and it's not necessarily super typical amongst different municipalities, unless I'm mistaken. This is something that we do. It's not across the board, but every municipality does. But if you could walk through the slides, I'd be really interested to dig into it a little bit.
If I may, I think a lot of municipalities do something similar. They just do it in a different way. So we have a more formal kind of how that number is calculated, where there's other municipalities that have an equipment replacement fund, which is a set dollar amount, and then the departments or the committee has to decide what is purchased. So I think the strategy of it is similar to what a lot of other municipalities do. just our process is a little more formal. So for the replacement funds, you also may hear these as sinking funds if you're involved in those kind of conversations. So the purpose of it is to provide kind of stable cash financing for our equipment, because we know if we have plow trucks that we need to plow the roads, the need for the plow trucks is not going to go away, and they also are not going to last forever. So we try to plan for those within our finances. And so in each one of the replacement funds, there will be a supporting document that shows each one of the pieces of equipment that is included in the city's fleet, what that replacement cost is, what the trade-in value or the sale value would be to get the net cost, and then we divide that by how many years we expect the piece of equipment to survive to figure out what that annualized cost is. So in this example, $550,000 piece of equipment, we think we'll sell the old one for $50,000, so it's a $500,000 kind of net cost that we'd have to pay if we did it this year. The useful life is 10 years. So then $50,000 would need to be set aside per year, but then we inflate that by 3% of inflation. And then also the interest is earned on that money while it's sitting there and is applied back into it to try to account for the inflation for those other years.
And since this is tax money that we collect, there's no arbitrage that factors into any of that, right?
Correct. Yep. And so it's been really helpful that interest rates have been so high right now, because that's helped us absorb a lot of this really high inflation that we've seen on our equipment too. So that's been able to help offset that. So the benefits of doing the replacement fund, so it does demonstrate what that annual cost is of the equipment that we have. You know, when you are now buying a new piece of equipment or doing something else that's new, you're really committing to the fact that, you know, this has an impact, not just now, but for the future. So it is more diligent about that. It also evens out the tax levy. Instead of, say, we don't save money and we just, you know, cash finance things when they come, you could have these peaks and valleys, which are really hard to manage from a budget perspective, but also from a taxpayer perspective. You know, you don't want to see those peaks and valleys. We really try to want to keep things as even as we can. It does allow for cash financing, but it still maintains that intergenerational equity, which we talked about earlier. So it's still 20 years worth of property owners that are paying towards this 20 year of equipment. It's just the first 20 years instead of the back 20 years. From an operational perspective, the replacement funds are really helpful because it gives the departments flexibility. So instead of, you know, if we said you can buy this new truck in year 3, we have to wait till year 3 to buy that truck, even if the old one breaks, even if there's significant maintenance issues, even if there's a 2-year wait time on trucks, which we've seen a lot lately. It really hamstrings us. Where with these replacement funds, because we've got cash finance or we've got money accumulated, we can sign contracts when we need to. The departments have flexibility so they can do what they need to do to make sure that their fleet is doing what it needs to do. And then it also just defers the likelihood of deferred maintenance, because again, if you have to wait to buy a new piece of equipment because that's when the money's available, you know, you're likely deferring stuff, which tends to cost more in the long run. So this slide kind of shows that borrowing and replacement funds both serve that same intergenerational equity purpose. It's just a matter of whether you're paying interest cost on it as well. So are you paying interest or are you earning interest and putting that back into the project? That's all that I had. I guess if there's a question.
Yeah. One question I just wanted to really quickly go back to in this replacement fund section. Did I see in there that for the replacement, the life of some of the vehicles and the equipment, that like the DOT estimates something like 6 years and they use that, but we're using 10 to 15. So we're already trying to get our money's worth out of this and make sure that when we buy equipment, we don't just buy it because, it doesn't have Apple CarPlay or Bluetooth, stereos in the snow plows or something. We drive it for 10, 15 years.
Yeah. Public Works in particular, they will get equipment to last as long as they can, as long as it's reasonable. So yes, the chart that we have shows what the DOT's useful life is versus what we use as our estimated useful life, and it is consistently significantly longer because we do take care of our equipment. We make sure that we're using it well, that we're maintaining it, and we're doing what we need to keep it up. Mm-hmm.
And do we expect that to be the same or change one way or the other if we continue to prioritize electric vehicles, since there's no oil changes and less mechanical parts that could theoretically fail? But of course, then you have the batteries that are more significant portions. So do we expect that useful life chart to remain about the same, regardless of whether it's internal combustion or electric?
So the electric vehicles that we do have currently are more kind of fleet vehicles, so trucks and traditional sedan type things. Those we have a longer life on, so we think that they'll last 15 years instead of 10 years because of exactly what you're talking about. But a lot of it we don't necessarily know at this point. We're still trying to figure it out.
Where are the replacement funds captured? Like if you looked at that average property tax breakdown of, you're sending $11 to the senior center and $83 to the police station or whatever the actual numbers are. Are the replacement funds within each of those individual categories based on, or is it in the capital projects or? Okay, it's all within capital projects.
It's all in the capital projects number. Yep. And the hard part about pulling it out is, so let's say the council says we don't want to do replacement funds anymore, which I of course would not advocate for. That doesn't mean that money could be used for staff, for example, because you still have those pieces of equipment that still need to be replaced and still done repetitively. So whether you're doing it, over time, or if you're doing it kinds of as they come due, that cash would still be needed. But to answer your direct question, it's all within that capital projects fund dollar amount.
So when you look at that police, senior center, library, you're talking about staff and you're talking about annual operating expenses. So the keeping electricity on, mowing the lawns, paying for gasoline in the cars, that type of operating expense.
Exactly.
Plus staff.
Yep.
Other questions? Great.
If I could do one last plug, because I love our AAA Moody's bond rating. One of the things that they really credited us for, too, when they were giving us that AAA, is our budgeting practices, including these replacement funds. So just to kind of reiterate that what we're doing is a good, financially responsible practice.
How long was it on your goals list to get to the AAA? Was it 10 years?
So I've been here 10 and a half years. So there was a policy that was approved in 2012, right? Wasn't that the last time we did our financial guidelines? That even in there said we will continue to work towards AAA. So I think that's always the goal. Again, it's a great story to tell. It tells people that we're doing the right things, we're making good decisions, but then it's also cheaper. So long time coming though, right? Decades and decades of work by councils to get to that point.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Misty. Look forward to the future presentations about the budget and the CIP process, which is always, thanks for all your hard work. I know the staff has been working diligently. Just one of that cycle, that phase of the year. Audit and CIP and early budget. So I know it's a lot of work, so thank you for all you do. And thanks to all the staff for all that work, because especially, all staff but public works staff. Man, oh man, do they have an operation. When we talk about public works, when we get to those presentations, it's
Absolutely.
like, Tim, public works director, let's get comfortable because here we go. So a lot from the public works department. So thank you so much.
Off the top of your head, what fraction of the CIP is public works? It's more than half.
A lot. Yep, a lot.
Tim's got his work cut out for him.
Yep.
All right. Thank you so much, Misty.
Thank you.
Our next item of business is item 7, announcements. Our next committee of the whole meeting is, we are moving it. It was going to be June 25th, but it is now going to be moved to June 18, 2025, pending full approval from FACTv. So little asterisk, but unless you hear otherwise, our meeting is on June 18, 2025. Any other announcements? I'll take a motion to adjourn. Motion by Alder Dantzler and seconded by Alder Jetzer. All in favor say aye. Aye. Nays? Motion carries.
Get well, Julio.
We are adjourned at 8:13 p.m.